Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about a federal appeals court hearing on the challenge to Illinois' gun and magazine ban, higher taxes for gas and groceries, and the cost of the Independence Day barbecue. I'll then join the Center Square executive editor Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Are you looking for fair news coverage out of the nation's capital? Join the Center Square's editor-in-chief Dan McCaleb and D.C. Bureau Chief Casey Harper as they discuss all things coming out of Washington, D.C.
And as you said, I did a fact check on this because I really found it pretty misleading. Gas prices, yes, are down. But if you look at food prices, they increased.
No spin, just the news. Listen to the America in Focus podcast at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcast.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. Whether Illinois' gun and magazine bans are constitutional is up to a federal appeals court. The consolidated cases challenging state and local gun and magazine bans in Illinois were heard Thursday by a three-judge panel of the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Defendants asked the court to affirm the Northern District Court upholding the bans while reversing a Southern District Court injunction against the law. While the defense said that the banned firearms are dangerous and unusual, plaintiffs argued that's not the case, and the banned firearms are commonly owned. Judge Frank Easterbrook asked plaintiff's attorney Thomas Magg why bazookas can't be considered arms.
In your view, is the Stinger missile protected by the Second Amendment?
Probably not, because it would be dangerous and unusual.
Unusual compared to what?
Compared to anything. Even in the military, they don't issue man-pads, man-portable air defense systems like the Stinger missile to the average infantryman.
It could be months before a ruling is issued. Whatever the decision, it's expected the case will go to the U.S. Supreme Court. After an election year freeze of the state's taxes for groceries and gasoline, the two taxes are set to increase beginning Saturday. Andrew Hensel has that story.
On July 1st, the start of the fiscal year, the state's gas tax will increase by 3.1 cents to a total tax of 45.4 cents per gallon, while the tax on groceries is set to return to 1%. Bryce Hill of the Illinois Policy Institute says with the increases set to take effect, Illinoisans will be even more burdened by the high property taxes they already pay.
Now what's going to happen is you're going to feel the full effect of property taxes, any sort of offset with your income taxes, and nothing has been done at the state level to address the cost drivers of property taxes.
However, Pritzker says critics have no plan to address the lost funds if the taxes are not increased.
I now hear often Republicans complaining that the grocery tax is being reimposed. But these are the same folks who don't have a solution for, well, how would you reimburse local governments?
I'm Andrew Hensel.
And as preparations are being made for the July 4th cookout, Illinois families expecting to see grocery store prices slightly lower than the national average. Kevin Bessler has more.
According to the 2023 American Farm Bureau Federation Market Basket Survey, families in Illinois will pay $66.92 to host an Independence Day cookout for 10 people.
What they saw was a year-to-year increase in the hamburger buns, beef, and potato salad. But there were drops in chicken breasts, lemonade, and cookies.
That is Deanne Bloomberg, Director of Issue Management with the Illinois Farm Bureau. She says this year's cookout will cost significantly more than 2 years ago, although prices have fallen slightly from record highs in 2022.
We still, on average, the United States is fortunate that we still have the most affordable food supply in the world.
The federal government's broader consumer price index report for food at home shows an overall increase of 5.8% compared to a year ago. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Those are the top stories of the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square executive editor Dan McCaleb. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Freedom, individualism, limited government. On these issues, conservatives and libertarians generally agree. But where do we disagree? Check out the Future of Freedom podcast for civil, reasoned conversations about some of today's most pressing topics. It's not a debate. Our goal is to provide the best arguments from either side of an issue. Then you decide. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you find your podcasts.
Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me again today, as he does every week, is Greg Bishop, our Illinois Capitol Bureau senior reporter and editor. How are you, Greg?
Good. It's a busy week, a lot to tackle and inform our listeners about.
We are recording this on Thursday, June 29th, which means we are approaching the July 4th Independence Day holiday. So happy Independence Day to you, Greg, and to all of our listeners. I hope everyone can enjoy a safe and happy holiday. Greg, Illinoisans might not be enjoying the holiday as much as others around the country because our taxes are going up this Saturday, July 1st. Tell us, Greg, what taxes are going up and why?
So we've got the state's gas tax that's set to go up about 3.1 cents from when it went up an additional 3.1 cents a gallon January 1st. And this is after back in 2019, the state passed with bipartisan support a capital bill that's funded by doubling the state's gas tax from 19 cents to 38 cents and tacking on a annual increase that was supposed to go in effect July 1st of each new fiscal year. So what we have is the most recent tax increase for motor fuel tax in Illinois kicks in on Saturday. And this was after, again, a January 1st increase. But the reason we had two increases in 1 year is because last year, during an election year, legislators approved a tax package that froze the annual increase, citing high inflation costs. So the increase that was supposed to go into effect July 1st of last year was actually postponed until January 1st of this year. So ultimately, in the past 6 months here in Illinois, taxpayers are going to be paying an additional 6.2 cents per gallon of gas because of the annual increase in that gas tax. Illinois already pays among the highest gas tax in the country. We're the highest in the region, and this annual increase definitely tacks on to what is a necessity, especially for those who live in more rural areas. You can't just hop on a train and get to work if you live in a farming community. You've got to fill up your truck and get to work. So that's obviously a hit to taxpayers starting July 1st, but also part of last year's election year tax package that they passed. They reduced the grocery tax from 1% to 0%. So they did that for an entire year from July 1st of last year to coming up July 1st of this year. So that 1% tax on groceries will also go back up. So those are some key necessities for Illinoisans that they're going to see some higher prices, at least when it comes from the tax that is put onto those goods.
Greg, I'm no mathematician, but I think I can figure this one out. So 3.1 cent gas tax increase in January, 3.1 cent gas tax increase this coming Saturday, July 1st. Crunching the numbers, that's 6.2 cents that Illinoisans will be paying more in gas than they were just in December of last year. Of course, with inflation, gas prices are already elevated. I'm looking at AAA's gas price index by state. Illinoisans currently are paying $3.94 a gallon on average right now. That will go up. The average will, depending on the market price of gasoline, that is likely to go up on Saturday with this 3.1 cents per gallon tax increase. Just looking at some of our neighbors. So that's $3.94 now, assuming the market price of gasoline stays about the same. That's going to go up to $3.97 on Saturday. Missourians pay $3.28 a gallon. Iowans $3.38 a gallon. In Wisconsin, it's $3.42 a gallon. In Indiana, it's $3.39 a gallon. So Illinoisans already paying significantly more on gas are going to pay even more on gas on July 1st. I just want to make sure that's clear to our listeners.
Yeah, and again, it's not the end of the taxes because next year there's going to be yet another increase tied to inflation in Illinois' gas tax, and it's going to be like that every year moving forward. So, one question is just how much can you tax a gallon of gas? Another thing, too, with this is it's not just the state gas tax that's on top of the federal gas tax. In Illinois, they allow for local governments to tack on an additional local tax plus a sales tax on top of the sale of gas. So there's tax stacked on top of tax, stacked on top of tax. And it's something that Illinoisans definitely see in their tax for gasoline when compared to other states.
Yeah, how could I forget about the sales tax that's on top of the regular price of gasoline and the gas taxes that are assessed in Illinois? And of course, with the inflation, Illinoisans are paying even more in the sales tax because gas taxes are prior. That's the sales tax is not on the price of a gallon of gasoline. It's on price of the dollar that you pay for each gallon of gasoline. So Illinois really, they're paying among the highest taxes when they're filling up their tanks compared to the rest of the country. And as you also mentioned, of course, the sales tax, the 1 cent sales tax on groceries will also be reinstated on Saturday.
And just one little note on groceries, people heading to their backyard barbecues for Independence Day, a little bright spot. It's a little bit cheaper than it was from the 10-year high just last year. However, it looks like hamburger buns are 17% more expensive this year than last year. Lemonade, though, that's down 16%. So all of those costs definitely going to be on the minds of consumers heading into Independence Day.
No doubt, always need to be cost conscious in Illinois because of our tax structure here. Greg, let's move on. A ratings agency this week, S&P Global Ratings, released a report on Illinois' pensions and what that means for state government finances, etc. Tell us, what did the S&P say in their report about Illinois' underfunded pension systems?
Well, they said that Illinois' pension funds are poorly funded, and there's a lot of work to do. Now, it wasn't all negative. S&P did say that the state is making some positive steps forward with funding pensions, but they say there are so many other factors involved, including an expected 2.2% increase in the overall cost of pensions for taxpayers over the next decade. And this is obviously very important for Illinois' finances because we have among the worst funded pension system in the country, with about 42% funded and $140 billion unfunded liability. Those are expected benefits to be paid in future years that are not funded. So we only have 42% funded. Something else S&P Global Ratings told me, I talked to two of their analysts, and they said that the idea of this ramp to get to 90% funded by, I think, 2045 it is, that's not good enough. They say that's not fully funding, and they have to get to the 100%. That's fully funded. So we've heard that before in the past and some pushback on that, but S&P is a ratings agency, so they look at all of these factors. But something else, too, that's really putting pension pressure on state and local budgets, they note, is other post-employment benefits. These are benefits like health insurance. In the state of Illinois, Tier 1 pensioners, when they retire, they get fully subsidized health insurance, let alone the 3% compounded annual increase to their pension each and every year. So the overall costs obviously going to put continued pressure on state and local budgets for the healthcare of retirees in Illinois. And these are all factors involved in what's compounding the problems with Illinois' pension funds. And S&P notes that the state has made some progress in continuing to further fund and increase funds, but it's not going necessarily far enough, they say. Now, this obviously is a topic that's been talked about in Illinois for years. We had a Tier 2 pension system implemented in 2011 with fewer benefits. There was a lawsuit about whether or not they could reduce benefits elsewhere. The Constitution of the state of Illinois, the Supreme Court said you cannot diminish promised benefits. So that's one factor that's involved in how Illinois is going to try to get a hold of its pension costs. So these factors all together, S&P, it wasn't a credit rating action, but they said that Illinois' poorly funded pensions are going to continue to compound the problems with state and local governments. Something else to add, too, is they say that there, in some areas, you have high property taxes, that you also have demographic trends that are negative and population loss. And these are other factors that are going to play into Illinois' state and local pension woes. So not a credit rating action, but still a report that should get some conversation going on how exactly the state's going to further manage its pension problems.
Right. And that $140 billion that the state says there are 5 state-funded pension systems that does not include the local pensions, for example, local police, Chicago Fire, and the local ones from across the state. They're massively underfunded too. So what we're talking about here specifically is the state-funded pension systems. And Illinois' budget goes into effect Saturday, July 1st, the same day that the tax increases go into effect. And it's a more than $41 billion budget. And something like $10 billion of that $40 billion, $41 billion budget are already going to pay off these pensions, these state pension systems. Am I right on that?
Well, just to correct you, it's a $50 billion budget.
Sorry. How could I forget?
How could you forget? It's the most expensive state budget in state history, Dan. Every year,
right.
It's the most expensive state budget. But yeah, $50 billion, and 1 out of every 5 tax dollar the state takes in is going to go to pensions. And what the report seems to indicate is, and they don't say this in this report, but Illinois' pensions are expensive and the costs continue to grow. And there doesn't seem to be any will at the Illinois State House to address how expensive the pension system is, especially with the idea of 1 out of every 5 tax dollar going to state pensions not being enough, according to S&P, to fully address all of the pension issues. So there's been conversations in the past that maybe we need to change the state constitution, put it up for a voter referendum. Nothing like that was filed this year by Republicans, who typically do file that type of constitutional amendment. But in the past, we've seen that brought up, and it doesn't advance anywhere. So will that be a conversation moving forward in a future session? That is yet to be seen.
We know from history that the General Assembly and governor's office have been slow, or really it hasn't been a priority for them addressing the rising costs of pension and whatnot. So we'll
except to give it more money. And that's something that the governor does in his budget, is he goes above and beyond what's statutorily required. But that's not enough to fully fund the pensions as actuaries are looking for.
Right. Moving on, you were in court today, not you personally for anything you've got going on in court, but you were in court to cover a hearing in a federal appeals court to the challenge to Illinois' gun and magazine ban. Again, reminding listeners that we're recording this on Thursday, June 29th. You were in court today. What happened in court today?
Well, I wasn't in court. I was there virtually. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, they held their hearing on the state's gun and magazine ban, and also the bans on guns and magazines in Cook County, Chicago, and Naperville. And this all comes out of cases challenging the state's gun ban. Flashing back to January of this year, Governor J.B. Pritzker enacted the ban on semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities. Then he had lawsuits starting to file at various levels, both state court and federal court. Well, in federal court, there were 4 plaintiffs in the Southern District that got a preliminary injunction against the state from enforcing the law. The state went to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and got a stay reversing that injunction, essentially. So that was from the Southern District. In the Northern District, there were cases challenging Naperville's gun ban. There were cases challenging Cook County and Chicago's gun ban. In all of those cases, the Northern District judges sided with the state and local governments upholding the ban. So what the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals did is they took the Southern District cases, the Northern District cases, they combined them and had them file their arguments throughout the past month in an expedited hearing. Today, Thursday, was the day that they heard that case. And it was about an hour and a half long, and you had the state essentially make arguments that semi-automatic weapons are weapons of war, are dangerous and unusual, and are only used for criminal purposes and not for self-defense purposes. And also the recent increase in what they say is an increase of mass shootings across the country requires governments to take this action. But plaintiffs, they sued, essentially saying that the law violates their Second Amendment, and they're pointing to previous U.S. Supreme Court precedent that says that courts have to evaluate gun laws based on text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment. So the arguments in court on Thursday, you had a 3-judge panel that heard arguments from the defense, and then they started asking questions of the plaintiffs, including whether or not bazookas could be banned and have that be constitutional. Well, one of the plaintiff's attorneys, Thomas Magg, he instantly came out and said they're not talking about bazookas, they're not talking about grenades or atomic weapons. They're talking about commonly owned firearms like AR-15s or semi-automatic shotguns or semi-automatic handguns that hold more than 15 rounds in a magazine. But one of the judges, Frank Easterbrook, he asked Mag, he said, well, why can you ban the sale and possession of Stinger missiles? And Mag said that's because Stinger missiles are unusual and dangerous, which is a classification that allows for something to be banned based on historical precedent. So he says that ultimately, Stinger missiles, it's somewhat indiscriminate. He said that they're manned anti-aircraft weapons. And he says that even in the military, they don't hand those out standard issue to the infantrymen. But he says the firearms that are in common use, like AR-15s, shotguns, and handguns that take more than 15 rounds in a magazine, he says those are in common use. So it really comes down to, I guess, what the arguments are that the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals is now taking under consideration. Now, what happens from here? It's unclear. It could take weeks. It could take months for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to go one way or the other. They could either say that the preliminary injunction can be issued, or they could say no preliminary injunction. The law stands. From there, it's totally expected to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the big question, at least for a lot of gun owners, Dan, is that decision going to be made before January 1st of 2024? Because part of Illinois state law is you have to register previously owned firearms that are banned under the law by January 1st of 2024 or face criminal penalties. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions. When is this going to be ruled on? How fast can the U.S. Supreme Court take it? And will it be before that January 1st deadline? So a lot of people still watching this space very closely.
And of course, that registry itself is subject to other legal challenges in Illinois against the right against self-incrimination. Greg, before we move on, we're running out of time. I want to get to one more story here, but I got to tell you that the questions about bazookas and Stinger missiles, that just seems strange question in my opinion.
Analysts that I've seen online say that seems the appellate court justices did everything they could to not talk about the weapons that are banned and instead wanted to talk about weapons that are of no issue in what's being challenged here. So maybe that's an indication of what the appellate court ultimately will rule on.
Greg, we have just a minute left, but the U.S. Supreme Court today, in cases involving Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, essentially said that affirmative action admission policies at these universities were unconstitutional. We wrote about that at thecentersquare.com today, and we're writing about it in Illinois, specifically because there's been already some widespread reaction to it.
The first reaction I saw was from the Illinois State Board of Higher Education, and they said that the ruling is, quote, an attack on people of color, particularly black people who face discrimination through multiple facets of American society. Governor J.B. Pritzker said the decision only sets us back. Republicans, however, had a different take. State Representative Brad Halbrook told the Center Square that the ruling is about fairness. He said, quote, students deserve equal access and equal opportunity. Disregarding applicants simply on the basis of race is wrong, he said. It's time for unfair policies were rescinded, and the Supreme Court ruling was the right one. So you can kind of get an idea there as to how this issue is being viewed by Democrats and how the issue is being viewed by Republicans. We'll see how this gets implemented.
Interesting. As usual, Greg, thank you for your insight into these very important stories. But we are now out of time. Of course, our listeners can keep up with the stories we talked about today and much, much more at thecentersquare.com. For Greg Bishop, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.